hey, we're just learning about this CO2 thing, and now there's another thing called circular economy that I need to know about, and there's this biodiversity thing, and the green transition and the knowledge and the tools that we need for the green transition. It's a bit like standing on an escalator that's coming towards you. If you stand still, you're rolling backwards. So you need to view your skill set and capacity building around sustainability, both for yourself and in the organization that you're in, as a process, not as a fixed point that, okay, now I learned this and then it's done.
When we teach individuals in our client organizations about applying this knowledge to their own work life and develop hypotheses and develop business cases, it seems like something sort of is falling into place mentally in a way where it's like, oh, so we can do a sustainability case here without it being a sacrifice to the business. It's actually a value driver. Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about corporate learning and how to lower the bar for success in order to enable habitual learning. I'm having a conversation with Joachim, co-founder in Green Innovation Group, about how we can co-create an environment in a corporate for habitual learning on sustainability. I hope you enjoy it. Hello Joachim, welcome to the podcast episode today. We're going to talk about learning. I'm excited. Are you excited?
I'm super excited. Always good to be on the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast.
Welcome. How are you feeling today?
Quite good. Overall, we've also been recording a lot of episodes today, so can also feel that I'm getting a little bit tired, but then we had a very nice lunch and a good swim, so all is good.
You're building the stamina to go
Let's
through.
hope so.
But that's also why we chose this topic for this conversation. So I think for many of our listeners, they will be working in organizations where they have a limited amount of time dedicated to acquire new knowledge, to orient themselves in the body of knowledge that is their profession. So that's why we want to talk about this in this Sustainable Healthcare Podcast, because sustainable healthcare is something that we continue to learn more about as a society. New theories pop up, new technologies pop up, new ways of collaborating pop up. So there's a lot of knowledge development, you could say. So we're asking ourselves the question, how might we help our clients develop and sort of inhabit a learning culture? So what's your take? How is corporate learning done today?
I think I would like to take a step back actually and start with acknowledging what you're saying, that not only from our listeners, but also most people who work with sustainability in the healthcare sector are not doing so full time. It's only part of their job. They're 5, 10, 15% allocated to this. Their normal work is being a doctor, a procurement professional, clinical operations team, whatever it might be. And this is combined with a pretty hectic work life. I think no matter where you are in the healthcare sector, publicly or privately, there are quite high demands on your time, and we'll get back to what those demands look like in a minute. And at the same time, you have the whole healthcare industry is built around expertise, because at the extreme it comes down to life or death, and it's such a vast field that there are thousands of different diseases, and even if you're in a private company working with just one disease, some people are working in production, some in commercial, some in R&D and clinical, and so on. So we also used to have very high ceilings and high bars for what does it mean to know something, combined with the scientific as well.
So basically allowing for a very small margin of error. You need to know sort of for a fact with a number of decimals to
Yeah, both in terms of clinical research, but also a tendency to say, well, I'm just a doctor, I'm not a skin doctor, or I'm not a skin doctor with this particular area. And that's also translated into the large corporates. Well, yeah, I'm a plastic expert, but I'm not an expert in barrier parameters with this particular polymer. And that goes both good and bad. But that sort of gives a playing field for sustainability knowledge within the healthcare sector, where the conception is that we have to know a lot to actually do something. There's very limited time and resources to do so because of the combination that we're usually not fully allocated, and we are also have a very hectic work life. So, I mean, of course, this differs from well, let's say you're working in a private corporate company, medtech or pharma. You're meeting in a Monday morning. Hopefully the kids behaved all right that morning and you're like got your breakfast and sort of recharge. Often that's also not the case. And then most people's workday in a large corporate is, if not back to back, then packed at least with meetings.
Yeah, especially Mondays, right? Mondays are for meetings because
Mondays
that's
are
when
for
you,
meetings, but
when you
most
talk.
of the time Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays are also for meetings. That's a different episode why it is like that and why that's maybe not so efficient. But that means that finding time to do deep work, not only even for learning, but just to sit down and do your individual tasks is quite hard in an environment like that. And then if you put learning on top of that, that's a very hard thing. And what we are seeing is that more and more people in an organization need to know about sustainability, at least the basics at various degrees. It's a bit like
we've called it becoming conversational on the topic,
yeah.
right? So just reaching that basic literacy is desirable for most organizations to have their FTEs just be conversational on the topic.
So we used to have that even in a 50,000 people organization. There was one CSR FTE, and she did the report, and that was basically what we did about sustainability. And then there were some environmental health and safety people, but they were mostly about the health and safety. Now everybody needs to know at least something. So that means that there's a massive change to learn for people, but where do you start? And what's important and what's not important.
And I think sort of an interesting byline to that is we can think of sustainability much like we think about finance. So you do need to know something about finance to be able to have a corporate job in most instances. If you don't know what a dollar is and the difference to a cost and a revenue is
even if you're in HR, communication or production or
you would be able to have some basic literacy to have a conversation about the topic and understand that growth is this or that, a recession is this or that, just the basic literacy is what you would need. And in the same way as we've had financial reporting coming, we're having sustainability reporting coming up as something that is regulated to a small degree already, but will be more regulated later on, meaning that everyone will be required to have just a level of literacy where you can be conversational.
Yeah, definitely. And the good news is that most of the topics of relevance will have some driving key principles that will give you a quite thorough understanding of what's actually, or if not thorough, then a very good initial understanding of what is important, what is material and what is not material.
And when you say material now,
what meaning what moves the needle, what's actually important. So if it was something like biodiversity, then okay, loss of habitats, super important. Plastic bags in a well-regulated waste system, not that important. That could be one example, which brings me over to as well that it's a challenge for a lot of people that, hey, we're just learning about this CO2 thing, and now there's another thing called circular economy that I need to know about, and there's this biodiversity thing, and there's rare minerals, and
where do I of oceans,
and where do I need to start? For me, the three key things that I would look at the beginning is to the climate crisis, focusing on CO2, the circular economy, can get back to that more, and biodiversity. And with all these things, they are overlapping as well to a large degree, but they would be three good focus areas to start on.
To take a vantage point on.
And then I think another very important thing to understand is that the green transition and the knowledge and the tools that we need for the green transition, it's a bit like standing on an escalator that's coming towards you. So like if you were in a mall or something. If you stand still, you're rolling backwards. So you need to view your skill set and capacity building around sustainability, both for yourself and in the organization that you're in, as a process, not as a fixed point that, okay, now I learned this and then it's done.
The goalpost is constantly moving, right?
Yes, exactly.
With the speed that we acquire new knowledge, we also see that, okay, what was an ambitious way of addressing this problem yesterday is not going to be an ambitious way tomorrow. Tomorrow it's probably going to be more standardized and more an expectation than an ambition.
Yes. Focusing on that process will also, I think, be a better mindset for employees and sort of accept that, okay, this is something that we continuously need to do. The good thing is that if you take the approach that I described with focusing on the key underlying drivers, then there's going to be some core methodology that doesn't really change. I mean, yes, we might be more granular on CO2 measurement or how we report it, and new frameworks might develop, but cooling, for instance, and the cold chain surrounding pharmaceuticals is never not going to be important. And I keep, well, hopefully one day we fix it and then it won't be. But I mean, whether you put it into one framework or the other, that would be an example of a key driver.
As we've also discussed earlier today, the burning of fossil fuels, that's not going to turn sustainable from one day to the next or ever. So, you know, there's some basic intuitive knowledge that you can lean on. Burning fossil fuels is probably not a good idea. Using the animal filter is probably not the best way to produce calories for human consumption. Cooling is always going to be an expensive procedure due to the laws of thermodynamics. These are sort of some basic assumptions you can kind of build your hypothesis upon. However, we've also seen some discrepancies in the results coming out of, for instance, life cycle assessment analyses, where you will have, and this is an ISO standard, right? So it's very heavily scrutinized process and method, and yet you have different results. So how should a learning organization orient itself and say they're running an analysis of whether they should use normal cutlery and cups in their cantina or single-use cardboard or bioplastic cups or something? They run one LCA analysis, one life cycle assessment analysis that concludes that they should use the reusable one, and they do another analysis that comes out with a vastly different result, concluding that they should go for the single use. How should they sort of position themselves in that discrepancy when they're trying to buy into academic and methodological rigor, but the results come out different?
Yeah, so that's one of the frustrating part, that this is still sustainability, and especially applied sustainability, doing LCAs, doing for LCA for a specific product or a specific treatment in the healthcare sector, is still an immature area, and that naturally leads to a lot of frustration. I think it's important here to distinguish between how do you raise the knowledge level and the capacity building in an organization at large, and what should dedicated sustainability professionals or teams, how should they solve a specific problem? Like you said, with the plastic or reusable cutlery, for instance, because it's two different things. If you get different results on a particular choice using one kind of cutlery or the other, or one kind of, the professional will have the luxury of going to experts, and at the end of the day, they will have to make their best judgment. They're very smart people, and they will have to roll with based on the experts what they say. And then also live with the thing that okay, maybe that might change later on. I think some good advice in that case is also to really try and distinguish between, okay, is this an awareness case for us that we are removing some plastic cutlery, or is this something that's material? And it's okay, it's because it removes a lot of CO2 or material that's on it. And it's fine if it's an awareness case also. Just know that it's an awareness case, as this is not going to drive our change, but it shows us that we are doing something, and it's very visible. For the sort of more mass mobilization of an organization, or for larger teams, this comes back to the sort of playing field I described in the healthcare sector at large, with packed workdays, very high ceilings for what it means to be an expert. What we would advise our clients is that you have to create the learnings and the trainings around the people, not the other way around. Most corporates have online learning systems and lots of content that are never really used.
Yeah, we can ask our listeners today, when was the last time you logged into your corporate learning development platform?
Out there in the ether, raise your hand if you know this one.
In the metaverse.
I think designing it around that, and what does that mean? I mean, ideally that should be combined with having a habit focus and lowering the bar.
Yeah, so when you say lowering the bar, can you maybe walk us through what does that mean?
Because the requirements to be an expert in the healthcare industry are very high. We're like, you only have a PhD. Then you can have a junior position. I mean, we might sit here and laugh, but that's not an uncommon way of thinking, whether you say it out loud or not. And setting the bar at a PhD is actually quite unproductive, because it's not attainable. And even if that was the goal, how do you get a PhD? Well, you start by reading one page, and then at one point you start by writing one page, or half a page, or quarter page, and then all those small building blocks. So we have to unlock those small building blocks, and we have to integrate it into our everyday lives, because most people will not have the luxury of taking a year off to do a master's in sustainability in this area. And I mean, of course, there are a lot of classes and other things that you can take, but they also have the problem that they will often be a bit too general. I mean, they can be fine for creating a foundation, but a lot of the knowledge and the tools that are lacking in the healthcare sector, because it's such a specific regulated sector, is okay, so what does that mean for me? I mean, now I know what circular economy is, but I'm in charge of this factory, so what should I do? How do I do this and still guarantee the line output so that the patients can get their treatment, for instance? Or I'm a doctor, so what does that mean for me? And so on. And that is also where we try to help clients by curating and designing more specific trainings and knowledges. I will have the pleasure to teach a group of endoscopy doctors next year as well, and And we also work with people at factories or in the clinical operations and other places. So they are from the teams that are responsible for, let's say, a clinical area or production area, commercial. It's also very much about defining what kind of knowledge and what kind of tools will provide value for my team. If your team are driving salespeople who visit general practitioners or a commercial tender team working with tenders, okay, I need to be at a basic conversation level, just very high level on these sort of things, and then I need to know where to go when I need to know more. That could be one case. So I'm working with these tenders and I need to know, okay, when I hit this kind of requirement, I need to call Tanya from the sustainability department or the product department, and she can help me answer that question so we can still do the tender, for instance, or vice versa if you're in procurement. Or I'm a chemical engineer or a production engineer, and I need to also be conversational at a very high level. But then I also need to know maybe it's about how the utilities are connected to and what matters there, or how to do predictive maintenance that we already do anyway, but how to link that to sustainability. So that also, when we take our team members out to do a training and to work with sustainability, that of course they should come back and have learned something, that's a given, but they should also relatively fast see how that can provide value in their everyday work. And that's another key principle when I talk about lowering the bar and breaking it down, to sort of design the learning and the tools so that even if you walk away after 5 minutes or stop the presentation after 5 minutes, whatever it might be, you should have gotten some value that you can go out and apply. We cannot, so a lot of academia and learning, if you go to a university, is often structured like, I mean, if you don't put in a full semester on this course, you're not going to get it until, because we do the opposite of what we do in consulting, which is you bring the findings up front, we put the findings at the end. You have to read the whole book.
If you look at sort of the academic discipline of defining a problem statement, right? That is basically defining the problem statement and defining a hypothesis, and that's just something that we need to do on a micro scale. So say you're a line engineer and you're looking at the utilities, and you know that in CO2 emissions, the electricity energy bill is a larger emitter than the water consumption. Okay, so you're concentrating on energy. That's because you learned that energy is a larger emission source. So there you already applied some of that knowledge, where you did a lightning fast materiality assessment, saying that I should look at energy consumption and cooling first, then water, unless I'm in a water scarce area. So it's also one of the things that I find really interesting is when we teach individuals in our client organizations about applying this knowledge to their own work life and develop hypotheses and develop business cases. It seems like something sort of is falling into place mentally in a way where it's like, oh, so we can do a sustainability case here without it being a sacrifice to the business. It's actually a value driver. And then, it's sort of like a eureka moment quite often where they're like, hey, this can actually save us money. Who would have thought consuming fewer resources would cost less? It's kind of that logic does not seem always to be prevalent, and sometimes you need to kind of create an environment where the individual can look at their own situation, apply the knowledge, and then have that eureka moment of their own right. And so I'm curious, sort of when you're talking about making learning habitual, what are the concrete tools, besides lowering the bar for success, that's really important, but what are the concrete tools for habitual learning in a corporate context?
The key things would be to make it easy to do. How do you make it easy to do? Well, lowering the bar is one way of making it easier. It just feels easier and more realistic to read a text or read one line rather than reading a whole book. For instance, it's more doable. It could also be about meeting the team members where they are in their everyday life. So if they have to log into a corporate procurement platform and that's not part of their normal workflow, then they really have to make a lot of mental effort and have that surplus of energy to go do it. Whereas if you...
There's probably a problem with the login.
Yeah.
And then you have to talk to John from IT.
They haven't been in there. And whereas if you hit them in their inbox, if you talk about it in an existing meeting that you already have, if you hit them with a text on the cell phone or something like that, or you connect a podcast to the podcast app that they're already using, then the barrier of resistance is just much lower. So making it easier, and part of making it easier is also making it more visible. So there's this amazing book that I can highly recommend called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he has a great example that if you want to go running, a very good way of reminding yourself that you should go running is putting your running shoes and your running clothes in front of your door. So you literally have to step over it to get out. So I mean that goes to the learning platform versus the inbox as well. That the more hoops we have to get people to go through, the more difficult it will become. The second one is to make it fun and rewarding. So the way that we consume content, broadly understood, entertaining, educational, as individuals and private persons, is vastly different from how it's set in a corporate or public organizational setting. And they have, and that doesn't mean that it have to be super short TikTok videos or something, but but sometimes it can also be that. But it's just it's interesting to see how big the difference is between the variations of formats and lengths that we consume as individuals, and then like a standard corporate training video or session that you have to say. So how do you make it fun? How do you make it rewarding? It's a bit individual what makes it fun, but there's we've had Alexander Holland from the Dyriske team in here. It's in Danish, but it's a great podcast about animals and biodiversity. And he's also super fun, and there are others out there in English where it's the knowledge is not less good just because it's
deploying humor.
Deployed with humor. And in terms of it being rewarding, there are ways to. I mean, part of it is individual, but being able to that it actually makes you better in your work is a very big part of what it can make it rewarding. But you can also hack that yourself. I mean, you can take a piece of chocolate every time that you listen to a sustainability podcast, or
every time you listen to the sustainable healthcare podcast.
Yes, to the sustainable healthcare chocolate. Yeah, of course. I'm too excited about the project that I always forget to plug our own things. But I mean, we have a plethora of knowledge in this podcast and on greeninnovationgroup.com, of course. And there's also a newsletter you can sign up to. Those would be some of the key things. So make it easy, make it accessible, make it fun and rewarding, and really lower the bar and give yourself that pat on the back for even reading a snippet. And then there's of course also then how do you learn the right stuff? and that's a bit more tricky.
I think that's enough content for a few more episodes to pick the right
exactly.
sources.
But I mean, some good places to start would be ourselves, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, those kind of bigger things.
Google Scholar, I think, is an excellent source of knowledge. I often use myself.
Yeah, if you have the time and you're
if it's like if I'm looking for something with the academic rigor, it's a great search engine to be honest. Yeah. But sort of more light, definitely. Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts, Joachim. I know this is really close to your heart, and I think that shone through clearly. So thanks a lot for sharing yourself.
My pleasure.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is all for today's episode of the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. We do sincerely hope that you enjoyed it. Please, please, please rate, comment, give us feedback wherever you catch your podcast. We really take that feedback to heart and hope that you got something out of it. Until next time, this is all for the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast by Green Innovation Group. Thank you.